Hello, friends. Very enlightening and soothing greetings of this beautiful evening to all of you. Dear friends, on this economic portal today, we are basically going to discuss the very pivotal matter which will address the strategic concerns for the global economy as well as for the Indian economy in particular. And the views have been expressed by Mr. Bill Winters, who is basically an American banker, the chief executive officer of the Standard Chartered Bank. And formerly, he was the co-head of JP Morgan Chase Investment Bank. So, friends, this is going to be a very, very insightful session as this great pioneer leader has expressed his overall ideology and his overall perspective for the persistent economic scenario. That is the various mindsets which are playing a very, very strategic role to actually operationalize and exist in the current scenario of economic uncertainties. The global headwinds have caused such a turbulence in the entire international arena that how the earthquake has basically struck the major economies across the globe, and hence how are they strategizing their overall policy framework, how they are remodifying their overall course of actions in order to seek an optimum balance between various economic parameters. Moreover, it is expected that a global recession would occur in this particular year. Why? Because of the continuous monetary tightening policies being practiced by various central banks worldwide. And that is also necessary because of the rising inflation. And why is the inflation rising on a continuous basis across various economies? Because of the very, very unforeseen factors which have been causing a lot of turmoil, a lot of imbalance in the major economic parameters. So in order to seek an optimum balance between the growth objective and the minimization of inflation level, of a basic fight is going on, and because of that the world economy is growing at a very, very slow pace. It is actually at a 3-decade low GDP rate, that is 1.7%. But still monetary tightening is being in practice because of the rising inflation. And controlling inflation is actually of vital importance. And dear guys, in the recent past, we have witnessed various instances occurring in various economies which are actually not favorable, like the policy paralysis in the Sri Lankan economy. Though it was able to withstand it, it was able to come out of that particular crisis with the help of various external agencies, with the help of various nations, India being one of them, to help Sri Lanka come out of that particular crisis it had undergone. So it is very important to sustain in these crises. And the good news is that these crises which have actually shaken the global economy, even in such crisis, the charismatic leader would be able to identify the opportunities. All of us are quite familiar. All of us are actually quite familiar with the SWOT analysis concept, with the pistol analysis concept, right? Now, when around us we are seeing the threats from all the corners, from all the sides, if we are surrounded by the major threats, the major global headwinds. But even if, but even then, if we can identify certain opportunities to grow, that is the real trait of the charismatic leader, and that's what India is doing, and that's why it is being appreciated at an international forum as well, be it by the World Bank or be it by the International Monetary Fund or various developed and developing economies across the globe. They are appreciating India's overall policy framework. They are basically able to highlight the Indian economy as the bright spot in the dark room. So this really means a lot. The year which has just passed, that is 2022, has been the devastating year for many economies. They can blame COVID pandemic, which has shaken the entire economic scenario. It has shaken the health sector worldwide, causing a lot of crisis. Along with that came the war, accompanied with various supply chain disruptions. Yes, these are very, very threatening situations, because of which the entire globe is engulfed with a storm. But even then, if India is able to diversify, so the diversification process comes at a later stage. But even then, India being the developing economy, being the emerging market, is able to sustain itself. Along with that, it is able to provide help to other countries, be it for the supply of vaccines, be it as a helping aid, who is working as an angel to provide necessary items such as food or providing the funds. This really means a lot. Our leaders are helping to deal with the current situation in a very, very optimistic manner. That is, their extraordinary policies are not only helping us to attain our self-sufficiency, but also we are able to provide a very valuable helping hand to our friends, to our neighboring countries across the globe. This is really marvelous. And again, Mr. Bill Winters, who is the CEO of Standard Chartered Bank, he also praises the overall framework of our economy. He says, a sense of confidence in India about the state of the economy is actually quite justified, given its strong growth amid a global economy that's being pummeled by multi-decade high inflation, war, an energy crisis, and turbulent financial markets, said Mr. Bill Winters, Group Chief Executive of Standard Chartered PLC. Various segments of the Indian economy, from policymakers, businesses, and financial system, appear to be singing from the same song sheet in a turnaround from the earlier discordant notes across the economic spectrum, he said. That is, he wishes to state that the Indian leaders are actually working in a very, very synchronized and coordinated manner. That all the concerned departments who are responsible for taking the strategic decisions, they are singing from the same song sheet. Everyone is of the same ideology majorly. He further quotes, earlier, the beginning of every meeting in India was a little litany of things that are going badly. That is, in the earlier meetings, quite a number of years back, the meetings actually used to begin with a lot of chaos, several people complaining of several issues. But now the entire scenario has changed. That's what he says. That is, now the early part of the discussion isn't it going great? I have been coming to India for 35 years, and the alignment between the perspectives of the local business people, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, financial institutions, external investors, domestic investors, government, economists have never been this consistent. And mind you, these particular statements are being made by an American banker who is the CEO of the Standard Chartered Bank. He is making such a statement, who is observing such a wonderful pattern existing in our economy. So we should be actually proud of this particular concept. Yes. India was the fastest growing major economy in the world in 2022, as other heavyweights faced challenges due to the energy crisis, COVID-related lockdown, and supply disruptions. As we have discussed in the beginning of the session, wherein we discussed about the policy paralysis occurring in the Sri Lankan economy. Then our neighbor Pakistan also underwent major crisis. Furthermore, the record high inflation led to the central banks raising the interest rates, and that eroded the asset prices. So while the crypto meltdown led to bankruptcies, the bursting of bubbles in stocks and bonds wiped out trillions of dollars in investor wealth. However, India has weathered the storm with the least impact and stock indices at the highest ever premium to the MSCI Emerging Markets Index. Winters believes the central banks need to run tight monetary policies to contain the price pressures, which would actually translate into slower economic growth. He further states, I'm still of the view that inflation is actually going to be pretty difficult to bring down. I think the central banks have to do a little more. Ideally, you can slow the wage growth, because I think that is really the driver at this point. You can't slow the wage growth without slowing the economy. The global financial system, especially the banking sector, is actually quite resilient despite the turbulence in the markets. Though the same may not be true with the shadow banks. He further says, I think it's really amazing we haven't had more accidents. This is the worst year in markets since 1972. It has been horrific in both equity and fixed income markets. You get a massive shock with a pandemic, and then a further massive shock with wars and the effects of the climate change and the geopolitical tensions. And there is almost no impact on the economy because the banking system is rock solid. And that's why we Indians should actually be very proud of the overall governance pattern followed in our country, because our banking system is acting like our acting like our backbone for success. It is in the rock solid state. All credits go to Dr. Shaktikanta Das, the RBI governor. Furthermore, let's discuss the detailed interview with this great pioneer conducted by the major journalists MC Govardhan Rangan, Bodhisattva Ganguly, and Joel Rebello. So, the first question being raised to him is, the global economies are actually witnessing what they hadn't for decades, that is recession and inflation. We have three different scenarios playing out in China, Europe, and the United States of America. How are you reading it? So, Mr. Bill Winters says, I think the biggest threat is actually inflation and the inability of the central banks to actually control it. When you just read the headlines, you think that the inflation problem is behind us. Well, it's not right. I mean, we know the price of oil went up and the price of oil has come down. The underlying wage growth, to me, especially in the United States of America, and the labor shortage are the main issues. Inflation is going to be a little bit harder to tackle than what the market is thinking, which means higher interest rates for longer due to continuous monetary tightening policies by the central banks. And that could prompt a recession, which would be a bit challenging. Then the obvious geopolitical risks. I was very encouraged by the Bali G20 handshake. I have been encouraged by the moderating voice of people like Indian Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji in this global conflict, particularly around Russia. Now, the second question raised to him is, what do these rising interest rates mean for banking? To which he answers, we have had very good earnings for the past year and a half, and we have guided for 5% to 7% growth apart from the interest rates. It's actually interesting to read the way the market looks at banks. They will all talk about the interest rate windfall. Well, it's a windfall related to zero, but zero is not normal. And zero interest rates are very hard for banking. We felt that very acutely. So we are back to normal. And given the intractability of inflation, it's actually hard to see that we will go back to zero interest rates even if we have an economic slowdown. We had quite a severe economic contraction in 2020 into 2021, but still no credit losses. And I think that's a reflection of obviously the government support for sure. Next question raised to him is, how far higher can the rates go according to you? To which he answers, we are closer to the peak. I guess we will end up with a terminal US Fed rate of 5%. That's substantially more than where we are today. But obviously, if the data change over the next year or year and a half than that. Maybe we don't get there, but I am still of the view that inflation is going to be pretty difficult to bring down. I think the central banks have to do a little more. Ideally, you can slow the wage growth because I think that is really the driver at this particular point of time. You can't slow the wage growth without slowing the economy, and they will keep on that, and there is going to be no relaxation. I should say, no tightening up on the fiscal side. The world is still run by populism. So, there is some kind of triumphalism in India right now. We just became the fifth largest economy in the world, overtaking old colonial powers. So, is this triumphalism justified? As asked by our journalists, to which Mr. Bill Winters says, absolutely. Directionally, it is justified that India is going through some kind of triumphalism right now. He further says, I have been coming to India 3-4 times a year for 35 years, and the alignment between the perspective of local business people, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, financial institutions, external investors, domestic investors, government, and economists has never been this consistent. Earlier, the beginning of every meeting was a little litany of the things that are going badly. But now, the early part of the discussion is, isn't it going great? We stayed fully invested in India for many years consistently building this business. We have also had problems in India through time. And dear friends, on this note, I would like to let you know, whenever we go through any particular article, or whenever we go through the views being presented by any respected ministry of our economy, for instance, be it Narendra Modi ji, our Prime Minister, be it our President, Dr. Draupadi Murmu ji, then be it our Finance Minister, Dr. Nirmala Sitharaman ji, our RBI Governor, Dr. Shaktikant Das, our Road and Transport Minister, Mr. Nitin Gadkari ji, our External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar ji. Their ideologies and the way they answered journalists' questions, the way they give the overall presentation of the existing economic scenario, and the way they present themselves and the way they address the core economic and strategic concerns, they are very, very consistent, very precise, very concise, and there's a commendable coordination and synchronization in their overall dealings. All the departments are acting in a perfect synchronization. So this is really worth of praise, and we should be proud of this because of their extensively thought out and far-sighted leadership. Because of their overall perseverance, we are here at this level of stability, and we are the winners, as being quoted by Mr. Bill Winters. This is a great triumph for the Indian economy. Next question being raised to him is, how do you see the India opportunity? He says, we have a very, very strong business with internationally minded Indian corporations, and that's becoming more and more powerful as India reaches out beyond the borders. we have shifted our focus a little bit away from being primarily a lender to a balanced leader and a provider of services. We have got an extremely strong business with financial institutions in India, both providing a bridge to the rest of the world and also bringing international financial institutions in, because the international financial institutions are actually very focused on India now. We have always had a very strong proposition for the more affluent population, and that population is obviously growing dramatically. Now the next question raised to him is, when it comes to the global banks, we see different models. For instance, Citi has sold its retail business to be completely wholesale. But on the other hand, DBS has bought a local bank. What is the overall strategy of Standard Chartered? To which he replies, we have got a wholesale business which is quite structural. Our strength is in the wholesale part of our business, with our global network the real differentiator. India is an extremely important part of that global network, whether it's serving Indians in the diaspora or non-resident Indians who have the businesses or operations back home. There is the global dimension, and we are tapping into that quite strongly. While our market share in many individual markets is relatively small, the overall technology that we can deploy gives us a scale across the markets. So, what we lacked in scale in an individual market, we tried to make up for scale across our markets. And we also tried to make up through the partnerships. Now, the next question raised to him is, your reading is inflation is a problem. The rates have risen too fast and there is a bond bubble burst. We have seen the crypto bubbles burst and the issues like Archegos and the Credit Suisse. What's in store? To which he strategically replies, I think it is really amazing that we haven't had more accidents. This is the worst year in markets since 1972. It has been horrific in both equity and fixed income markets. Archegos was just good old-fashioned leverage. FTX was good old-fashioned leverage again. These are actually just badly managed liquidity portfolios in what may or may not have been good businesses. But these are actually the small things for the global economy. And I think about the massive shadow banking system that existed in China 5 years back. No accidents despite a substantial drop in the real estate values in China. No systemic banks have even gotten into trouble. Credit Suisse hasn't needed the government support. And so, I think it really speaks to the actions that everyone took after the financial crisis to basically desensitize the core financial system to the financial shocks. So, we all know that the credit cycle is not dead. The credit cycle is still there. And the credit cycles are pretty manageable unless it transmits through to the financial system. So the next question raised to him is, what do the events like the UK bond market crashing in a matter of a few days and then the Blackstone stopping the withdrawals in some of its funds show? Is the system actually fragile? To which he answers, I think there are pockets of fragility for sure. The Blackstone example is really an interesting one because there is still a reasonably substantial maturity mismatch in the non-bank sector. I think in the banking sector, we are very heavily regulated. Actually, regulation is not the binding constraint for us in terms of our liquidity profile. The binding constraint is actually our own risk appetite. But just in case we got a bit crazy, the regulators would stop that. You don't have regulation in a private real estate or the private credit fund. And I think that Blackstone example, the experience was a really salutary one for the whole private fund business. Interestingly, a $4.5 billion investment came into that Blackstone fraud from the California Endowment Fund. The Blackstone Fund actually is an excellent investment vehicle, but they are offering the short-term liquidity on what are essentially the long-term assets. And the entire story plays over and over again. So I think that's the system working actually, rather than not working. So you don't see a crisis lurking in the financial system? To which he says, on average, we have 2 or 3 financial crises someplace in the world every year, and a global financial crisis every 9 or 10 years on an average. And then a really bad one once in a generation. You get a massive shock with a pandemic, and then a further massive shock with wars and the effects of the climate change and geopolitical tensions. And there is almost no impact on the economy because the banking system is rock solid. The average level of the bank capital in 2006 was actually 5.5%. The 14% is the basis now, plus another 10% loss absorbing capital. So you were 24% capital ratios now, relative to what was about 6%. Now the next important question raised to him is, with the conflicts and the regional trade blocs springing up, what's happening to the entire globalization scenario? To which he says, globalization is definitely not dead. It's just taking on new characteristics. That is, it is going to the remodification phase. From our perspective, what's happening is just fabulous because the reshoring or nearshoring is actually going out of China into the markets where we actually have a bigger market share. Some of it is coming into India. Yeah, there are the Chinese companies investing in India as well. But some of that is going into Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and parts of the Middle East. And these are the markets where we have a very, very strong presence. So the trade volumes are up. Our cross-border investment volumes are up. The associated currency risk management is also up. So we do have a front row seat on this repositioning of the supply chains through our trade businesses, but also through our investment businesses. Obviously, there are glitches along the way. So he is also able to count on the core innate strengths of the banking sector overall, helping to very analytically deal with the current crisis. And this is being presented in a very, very strategic manner. And as I said, this is the true character trait of the dynamic leader, of the charismatic and the perseverant leader. And that's why he is the pioneer, the CEO of the leading bank. Now, the next question raised to him is, the Indian and European regulators are actually in dispute over the inspections of institutions. What's your view on this? To which he says, given the very substantial play in the Indian money markets, we are extremely interested in the outcome. We are concerned but hopeful of a resolution. Mind his words, he is saying that he is very hopeful of a resolution. That's another very beautiful trait of a true dynamic leader. Now, the next question raised to him is, did the first Abu Dhabi bank approach you for a takeover? To which he says no. Actually, I was looking at my computer screen, and so our share price jumped 20% pretty much instantaneously. I got off the call and wanted to know what was actually going on. Then I saw the Bloomberg story. My take on that is, of course, I have not discussed with First Abu Dhabi Bank and I had no idea about this particular fact. The first thing which is quite encouraging to me is that the people are beginning to see the balance sheet. That is, they are also beginning to see that there is the real value in the Standard Chartered Bank. He further addresses that we have got a super clean balance sheet, we have got good earnings growth, we are operating in very exciting markets. You can't create this franchise. The second thing that's clear is that the bank combinations are very, very complicated, and particularly complicated for us because we are operating in so many different markets. Given the fact that actually each regulator is actually working in a very well strategized manner. Also, every regulator has a say on these things. So if somebody wants to buy us, be my guest who wants to buy, but make sure that you reflect the full value of this franchise. Now the next topic the next question being raised is actually very, very relevant. It is regarding the ESG, and ESG has been a hot topic. ESG is basically a very conceptual framework which deals with three main pillars, that is the environmental pillar, then the social pillar, and then the governance pillar. So, Mr. Bill Winters is being asked that ESG has been a very hot topic. Now, the Fed chairman, Mr. Jerome Powell, has said he is not touching it. So, is that the right thing to do? To which he says it's actually a tricky area, particularly in the United States of America, because it has become political. So, I don't know what prompted the Fed chairman to actually make these comments about the regulation, but I assume that he is responding to the noise in the United States of America, which is that the US government or even the private companies should not be focused on sustainability. What's motivating us to have a very clear and aggressive sustainability strategy? One is that it's the right thing to do. We operate in all the large markets in Africa, and these are the markets that are actually going to be destroyed. So we have a self-interest in protecting the environment. So that's a great reply by the great pioneer, and the overall analysis, the overall viewpoint expressed by this great pioneer is actually giving us an in-depth analysis of the current scenario existing in the global economy. Moreover, it also helps us to draw great insights regarding the strategies being adopted by the major developed economies and developing economies across the globe. Furthermore, various crises which took place in the past have also been discussed in detail, with the main objective of that how does the present crisis, how does the present sensitive time relate to those critical times. The main focus being how to deal with this prevalent storm which have occurred across the globe, which have engulfed the entire globe. And specifically, he also mentions that the overall performance by the Indian economy is actually worth an applause. The overall economic performance, if we talk in holistic terms, is actually getting highlighted across the globe because it's really magnificent. It's really commendable that how synchronized and with such a beautiful coordinated framework the Indian leaders are working. Be it the synchronization between different departments at the ministerial level, be it the overall synchronization and the coordination between several business institutions and the ministers, or the coordination among the businesses, that's really commendable. And this helps us to actually conceptualize or visualize, had the entire scenario been normal, our leaders would have been able to create wonderful miracles. This is really commendable. So, dear guys, I am quite hopeful, and I believe you are also quite hopeful regarding the overall scenario of the Indian economy. And obviously, let's wait till 1st February because it's going to be a super day as the budget is to be announced by our respected Finance Minister, Dr. Nirmala Sitharaman. And I'm sure it would be of great significance. I'm pretty sure about this particular fact. And also, as India has taken the role of conducting the presidency conducting the presidency of the G20 summit in this particular year, obviously it would be of great relevance because it is being organized in such a sensitive global economic scenario wherein a lot of turbulences are there in all the factors. So we have to address each and every parameter and highlight the solution which would benefit everyone at the same time. And obviously, that would require a very broad-minded approach. And I'm sure this is going to be very fruitful and productive, as it is going to be solution-oriented, because I trust the extremely dynamic leadership pattern of our great leaders. So, thank you so much, dear guys, for attending this great session. And I really believe that, like always, you must be full of enthusiasm, full of new hopes, and that will help to fuel the economy with great prospects, because every thought of every individual counts, and we are the responsible citizens of India and a very crucial component of the global family. So it's really a pleasure to always conduct a session with you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Namaskar. Jai Hind.